Welcome to Halitics on the 13th day, Thursday, not Friday the 13th of April. Great to talk to you. It's really warm here, but I've enjoyed the spring. Maybe it's a little too hot. It is, after all, climate crisis time. We're right in the midst of it, human caused. A big factor, by the way, is our relationship with China and the Far East. Our trading with that region of the world has greatly increased both the pollution generated from that region, specifically pollution from electricity generating plants that rely mostly on coal, which is, of course, a filthy fossil fuel, but also on other fossil fuels as well, just, furthering the destruction of our planet. And then you have to transport the goods. This call, this talk, this live programming will be mostly about a focus on a relationship with China. I did call it Grand Thieves because, well, first of all, it's an arresting title, but also to bring out the theft of the birthright of tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of American workers, that right to a decent paycheck, a decent quality of life, and hopefully, and with reasonable hope, a better life for one's children. That has been taken away by a unholy cabal of Democratic and Republican politicians following direction from the plutocratic multinational class. If you want to join me, you can see the phone number there, 240-363-7190. And please subscribe. We've got to boost numbers here. We've had some great numbers with some of our programming, but some has not been as good. And the only way we can change that is if you if you subscribe, if you share, we can get there. I think the bigger fear, well, let me say it this way, because of the way we're responding to Ukraine and the Ukraine crisis, certainly there's real risk, real possibility of nuclear war emanating from Eastern Europe. And it's terrifying. And it's very, very sad, of course, for the people in that region more than for anyone else, because this has been a war-torn area for hundreds of years. And specifically over the past 100 years, Belarus, which is not currently fighting a conflict, but Ukraine and Belarus have seen some of the most deadly and bloody killing fields the world has ever known, and particularly during the Second World War. So it's just another tragedy that people there are undergoing. And I do think that could turn into a full-blown war, perhaps a nuclear war, a low level maybe. We understand there have been reports at least that Russia is using some forms of nuclear weaponry, and that wouldn't be a huge shock because we've used forms of nuclear weaponry as well in the Middle East. But in the end, to my way of thinking, China is the bigger threat. The bigger economic threat, without any question. Russia is a declining world power with a ever smaller population. China's got 1/5 of the world's population, along with India. It is the largest country in the world by far when it comes to population, and it has, I believe, now the largest economy in terms of gross national product, not GDP per capita, of course, but in terms of the total output, they're the wealthiest country in the world. They're bellicose. They're not that we're not. And this is really important that people understand that when I say that another country is bellicose, that doesn't mean that I'm arguing we are not. If I say Trump is not terrible, that doesn't mean I'm necessarily saying the Democratic Party is, although I often am saying that. It is possible to balance two competing views, two competing worldviews. Yes, China is our main competitor, but the fact that China does bad things doesn't absolve us or excuse us from doing bad things, and vice versa, of course. The fact that Republicans do really bad things doesn't excuse Democrats from doing really bad things. I do think right now the flashpoint is probably Ukraine, is probably the Ukraine-Russia war, but it's quite possible that the real flashpoint, the ultimate flashpoint, is going to be China, US. And we are seeing that in the increasing aggression arising out of Chinese expansion eastward towards Taiwan, military expansion. This is something I believe we should be very afraid of. I take a very different view of Russia and its spats with Ukraine, where I think there are reasonable arguments on both sides. The U.S. has been encroaching on with the West, Russia, and crowding Russia. And Russia, as I've mentioned, is a declining world power. The flip side of that is Taiwan is a democracy. We have been empowering China and the Chinese Communist Party for the past 30 years at great personal, in terms of the U.S., risk to our own power, our own influence, and has led, as I used in the title, the theft of the birthright of hundreds, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans. Now, this story or this discussion came about because I saw Nicholas Kristof's piece in today's New York Times, How to Avoid a War with China. And of course, Kristof gets most of it wrong, but he still raises a provocative and important topic. By the way, join me if you get a chance, 240-363-7190. I didn't actually check to confirm we're going live. I see it says stop streaming. I see it says click here to end broadcast, which means I think we are broadcasting. And I see the levels moving when I speak. So all of that, to me, says that I am actually talking to you. But the best way for me to know I'm talking to you right now live is for you to call me. And you can see the phone number. It says 363-7190 with a 240 area code. So I hope you will take an opportunity to at least confirm for me right now that I'm talking to you. What does Kristof say? Well, we need more deterrence and less provocation if we want to stop war with China around Taiwan. And I'm trying to understand, I guess what he's saying is what, more military, more ships, send out the Navy into the South China Sea. I'm not really clear. It's not clear from the article what that even means, more deterrence and less provocation, because it seems as though deterrence in this piece comes out to being provocation. In any event, here's where I think Kristof does make a very good point. In his view, the risk of conflict with China, and make no mistake, a war with China could well mean, well, as could a war with Russia, but I think even more likely with China, really the end of the world. It really means nuclear war. It's absolutely terrifying to think of the two most powerful militaries the world has probably ever seen at full-blown war. I don't know how we survive that. According to Kristof, the risks are primarily driven by the Chinese premier, his brutal repression in Xinjiang. And I, by the way, didn't look up Xinjiang. I'm not sure where he means by that. I'm thinking it's the Uyghur repression in far west China, but I'm not sure about that. And the enormous expansion of his nuclear arsenal. But what he also fears, what Kristof also fears, is American domestic policies, and that they could get worse if Democrats compete to denounce China. So what I think he's talking about there with the domestic policies are the tariffs, which I've often promoted and said we need the tariffs. I guess he's saying that's provocative. That's provocative if we start taking our once mighty manufacturing base back. Well, I guess it would be provocative. I'm sure the Chinese wouldn't like it. But the reason China is as powerful as it is, the reason the CCP has the ability to build an enormous stockpile of nuclear weapons, the reason it has the resources to repress the Uyghur population, the Muslim population, is because we have allowed our manufacturing base to go to China. We have offshored and outsourced our manufacturing, which is also, of course, why the climate crisis is not only as bad as it is, but is as difficult to rein in. At least if we were creating the pollution in the United States, we could impose more and more restrictive policies on the emission of greenhouse gases on our own industry. But it's not our industry anymore. It's China's. And we can't tell them what to do. We can't force them to impose, for example, the fossil fuels tax that is essential. We could do that here. We can do other things. We could impose tariffs. But Christoph said, no tariffs. We can't have tariffs. We our domestic policy, we can't steer this collision course. Again, it's all happening because we pursued the wrong domestic policies for 30 years. And whose fault is that? At least 30 years. So I have three faces, or actually four faces. I shouldn't say three, four faces on my little thumbnail there. The two Clintons, the president of China, or the premier Xi Jinping, and also Mitch McConnell. Because I want to be bipartisan here, or whatever. Both parties are to blame. And obviously, Jinping, as the face of China right now, reflects the policies that they have pursued. That said, I actually blame our leadership far more than China's in this regard, because if you're China, why wouldn't you take American manufacturing? Of course you would. It makes you more popular. It makes you, and it puts you in a position to enrich and empower your people while giving your party far more leeway to repress, right? Because the people will accept a modicum of repression, a political repression, if they're getting richer, if they're not hungry anymore. I mean, that's a major way that parties, that leaders placate the populace. That's what the Nazis did. As they took away people's freedoms, they at least there was full employment. There were big parties in the streets. We got to burn down synagogues if that was your thing. That was because the economy did strengthen under the Nazis, at least in the first few years. And they used the growing German economy to clamp down, to batten down on all forms of political opposition. So Christoph says, no, but we shouldn't make economic war on China. We shouldn't try to impose sanctions. We just need to send our military out there into the streets, in the oceans that surround China. But he also, and he acknowledges how bad China is. I need no reminder, Christoph tells us. He saw it. He was there. He saw the army firing on a crowd of Chinese who were protesting. And then he responds, but it was bad. But you know what else? They've lifted more people out of poverty than any other country in history. Of course, they had more people. Now I think India's number one in population. And they've vastly improved education and health outcomes. How have they done that? They've done that because of the money that has, the gusher of money that has accompanied our manufacturing base's relocation to China. All those Apple computers that Foxconn makes, all the vehicles that are now being assembled in Asia, that has led to an incredible amount of wealth that is retained in China. It is not multiplying through our economy with our workers in the Midwest getting good GM salaries. It's going right over to Asia. And the result is the empowerment of the CCP, the creation of an enormous army, a nuclear weapons arsenal, and better outcomes for their citizens in general. Now, I don't want to oversell this. The issue of getting out of poverty, yes, it goes to a degree to what you define poverty as, which is incredibly low income. So you had Chinese people barely subsisting in the rural areas, in the farm and agricultural region, while there were very, very few people involved in industry. With the relocation since really the early to mid 90s through today of American industry and Western industry to a lesser degree in China, there's been a massive migration to the cities where there is pay, where you get enough to eat, but life is still not real pleasant. People are jumping off of the roofs of factories, and that was a while ago, but it's, a gradual improvement of the quality of life in China. But let's not oversell it. Let's not oversell it. Yeah, they do have universal single payer care. Things are better. The reason they're better, simply put, our manufacturing base is now in China. What was ours is now theirs. What we built, now they are profiting from. And they're also profiting because we still have residual wealth, to a great degree borrowed, to a great degree based on deficit spending by our government, which we use to purchase Chinese goods. So the greatest risk to a thermonuclear war is a direct result of our economic policies. Free trade, liberalized trade, avoiding, ignoring, simply eliminating tariffs. And of course, Trump responded to that. And that, by the way, is why he was president. So let's get back to the slides here real quick. So this is, again, Christoph, how to avoid. He says, well, he supports Biden's steps to bolster American industry and his remarkable efforts to increase military preparedness in the Western Pacific. Now, he says he supports those steps. What Biden's basically done, at least with respect to China, is he's maintained Trump's tariffs, which is the right thing to do. I mean, yes, that's good. But I don't know what other steps he's talking about. Maybe massive deficit spending. In the end, that's going to impoverish. What we really need is raising taxes on the wealthy. Use that money. I support deficit spending when we have a depression, which is what, of course, John Maynard Keynes said. But we don't have a depression right now. We have massive wealth and income inequality. We don't have a depression. We have some people who have so much money that alone raising taxes back to the levels that we saw in the mid to late 1930s through the 1950s would largely, if not ultimately, eliminate our budget deficit as well, along with a smart trade policy. Tariffs, bringing jobs back, the multiplier effect that results, the virtuous circle that results when American workers have more money in their pocket. Now, I go over this on a lot of programming because it is so critical. It is so important. This is what we must do, along with tax fossil fuels if we want to save our planet and save ourselves. So he says, yeah, we need to bolster American industry and we need to increase military preparedness in the Western Pacific. We wouldn't have to do that if China wasn't so rich and powerful, which is because of us. And although he says he supports efforts to bolster American industry, the way to do that, he fears, would be too provocative. So there's no specifics, no real solution. Then he goes on to say, Christoph, we have to tackle American dysfunction from addiction to child poverty in our failed foster care system, invest in our education system to produce stronger citizens and a more robust nation. That, not prickly nationalism, is what we should take from China. All right. The prickly nationalism, again, I think he's condemning, is saying, hey, let's bring back jobs to the United States. China's eating our lunch. We've got to take our lunch back. Well, if you want a better, stronger citizenry, and a more robust nation, we need a better, stronger economy. We need good working middle class jobs. And we're not going to have those unless we produce for the domestic market right here. We can do it. We can do it. Why is addiction such a problem? Because people are hopeless. Why? Along with a healthcare system that doesn't treat people. That's why, if you want to tackle addiction, let's create an economy that works for all of us. You want to address child poverty? I mean, it's obvious. Create an economy that works for all of us. Christoph is neurotic. He doesn't know where to go here. Because on the one hand, he doesn't want to say we've got to take jobs back we've got to take our jobs, our economy back. But the only way to address the pathologies that we face right now as a country is to build a strong economy, to raise it from the ashes of the exporting to China. And for whatever reason, and when I say exporting, I mean exporting the goods that we make here. I mean exporting the actual means of production to China. So that's how we would ultimately, right now, it might be considered very bellicose. China might say, we're not going to let you take your economy back. We love the fact that you buy the goods that we manufacture. And we love the fact that we get American currency that we use to buy, coastal properties in the United States. We love all that. We're not going to give that up without a fight. And maybe we would have to have, a real, maybe a trade war would become proxy wars in some places. But if it's a choice between our going down the toilet, or are having to fight right now with China in some, hopefully not hot war, I'm going to go for the latter at this point. China is the risk. Russia is not. It's that simple. All right, 240-363-7190. Remember, you got a call, so I know I'm talking to you. Why do I call the Clintons, McConnell, and Xi Jinping the thieves, right? What is that about? So here, let's go to, and I think this is pretty interesting, the Made in America movement site. And I found this here. I was looking for more information about how it came about, right? That China became the behemoth that it is. What happened? What were the factors? And I felt like I had some rudimentary knowledge, but I wanted more. And we saw Christoph talking about how repressive the government of China was in 1989 when it fired on protesting citizens in Tiananmen Square. So that's about a good enough place to start as any. So here we have Michelle Nashhoff. I don't know who she is. Made in America movement. I don't know who they are, but I support it. We should be making. By the way, if you're a progressive, I mean, it's really good to get in the streets. I support it. We need to stop. We need to stop subsidizing the oil and gas industry and the coal makers. We need to do all of that. We need to protect choice. Those are incredibly important. But if you really want to ultimately make things better, I think you got to focus on working people, because they're the ones with the votes that would ultimately reverse the political repression we are seeing, the political and economic repression we get from Washington. So after Tiananmen Square, there was opposition to granting MFN status. And the House said, all right, we'll give it to you. No, the House said no. But because the Senate didn't join in, Bush, at that time, vetoed the first Bush, H.W. I could have put him in the picture with the thieves. That was awful. I didn't want to do it. It's going back 30 plus years. But H.W., he was a big free trader too. Remember, it was his idea to go for NAFTA. He actually came up with NAFTA before Clinton. And Clinton campaigned against NAFTA, which was a big reason he won. In 92, the union said to Clinton, well, you want us to support you, you got to be against NAFTA. And he said he was. And then he backtracked and then he reversed. Made himself rich as Croesus as a result. I mean, I guess it was worth it to him, but not to the working people of this country or the Democratic Party, which has lost working class Americans in droves ever since. But H.W. was the original free trader. This was a great opportunity. And before him, Reagan spoke highly of free trade. This was an opportunity for Democrats to come solidly down on the side of working people. Did they? Did they? Well, let's find out. Let's find out if they did. Well, at first, it looked kind of good. Remember what I had said about Clinton? He campaigned against free trade. Bill, that's Bill, of course. He campaigned against it. And when he campaigned against NAFTA, he ultimately signed it. I think it protects our workers. Didn't protect them at all. Lost millions of jobs as a result. Even the Brookings Institute says, yeah, NAFTA was a mistake. In 93, Clinton said he would link MFN-SAS to human rights progress, which was good for China. That was what we should have done, because China, if we're going to trade with them, at least let's make sure that, for example, trade unions can operate without their leaders being killed, murdered, that people can protest unfair conditions. We shouldn't be letting a repressive autocratic regime steal our manufacturing. So Clinton said, okay, well, if they don't get their act together, kind of like I say to my son, if you don't clean your room, you don't get TV. And you know what? If I take away the TV and I take away the internet, he cleans his room. So when Clinton said, well, hey, if China doesn't treat its people a little better, then maybe, in Tibet, and there is repression of Christians and there's repression of Muslims, if they don't act a little bit more, respectful to their own people, no more free trade. We're going to take it away. And maybe they'll act in better faith. They'll treat their people a little bit better. Well, did that happen? No, it did not. In fact, in 94, a year later, Clinton said, well, we're going to delink their privileged trading status from their human rights record. They're not going to be tied together anymore. They get to be privileged traders. In other words, no tariffs. In other words, you don't have to go through a lot of red tape if you want to move your factory from Dayton, Ohio to Guangdong, China. You just do it. You just say, hey, you file a notice. You tell your workers in 90 days you're out of a job. Good luck. Sucks to be you. And then you're done. And you start paying people $1 an hour instead of $20 an hour. And the healthcare is paid for by the government, not by you. So you save a huge piss pot full of money. And you don't even have to worry about negotiating with unions because there ain't any in China. You have one place you go to, and that's the government. And a lot of times, let's say there's a problem, like you want to dump some affluent waste from your manufacturing plant into the Yellow River or the Yangtze. Well, you just a little backsheesh to the local government official, and it's all taken care of. So it's a really, really nice setup if you are manufacturing goods in China. Clinton said, oh, well, I don't know. They're continuing to commit their serious human rights abuses, but hey, everybody does, right? I mean, that's basically what Clinton said. So it's in our broader American strategic interest to reverse our policy that says if you abuse your citizens, then you don't get free trade with us. But for whatever reason, Clinton thought it was worth it. Now, I think the reason, look, again, hey, the Clintons are very, very rich people. They're very, very, they've got power all over the world. The Clinton Global Initiative, and maybe he really believed it was in our best interest to de-link human rights abuses in China with free trade, but I'll tell you this. If I tell my son, clean your room, or I'll take the TV away, and I don't take the TV away, he doesn't clean his room. It's only after I take the TV away that he keeps his room clean. So I kind of think when you denoink those human rights abuses, you get more human rights abuses in China. And it's not just that it hurt the Chinese people, of course, although in a way it helped and hurt them. The government gets richer and more powerful, but there are more jobs with slightly better pay. So people's lives get a little better economically, but there's no political freedom. What happens next? Or let's move on. So that's that's Bill Clinton. I said these are the thieves, right? These are the thieves that we've got to focus on if you want to blame, if you want to figure out why we've got such a huge problem with China. Well, I mentioned the Clintons. We'll get to Hillary in just a bit. But right now, I want to just talk about the Republicans for a moment. They have been, and I pointed out, George W. Bush, the free trade came relatively late to the Democratic Party. This was always more of a Republican idea. Remember, FDR absolutely was focused on good jobs in America, as was Eleanor Roosevelt, as was, by the way, Harry Truman. The FTC was tasked when the Democrats were the major party, when the Republican Party had been consigned, at least in Congress, to permanent minority status. It was the Democrats that were reliant on trade as a driver of good jobs and to make sure that we were exporting. We had a positive export record. We had a trade balance, a positive trade balance. It wasn't until the late 60s and the 70s and Nixon took over. And remember, Nixon's the one who went to China, not LBJ, not Jimmy Carter, but Nixon. It wasn't until Nixon that we began to loosen up our trading relationship with China and other countries. And Reagan and HW promoted this far more than Democrats ever did, but that did change. Mitch McConnell, when he could have rallied Republicans against the free trade relationship with China, against most favored nation status, didn't. And he has also consistently been a free trader. So you see it from both parties. And I'm just going to get to Hillary so a lot of people think I'm a Hillary basher, which is not untrue. I think it's fair. I don't think that I criticize her unfairly or that I ignore the positives because I haven't seen them. I mean, where are they? I could go back to the 90s and say she did try to get Hillary care. That would have been better than, I think, not getting Hillary care. But since then, she's kind of I don't know. Remember the 94 crime bill that led to mass incarceration? She was for it. She lobbied for it. She's been for every job destroying free trade bill that's come. Not for everyone, but many of them. When she hasn't, it's been because of pressure from working, where she's made a political calculation, it seems. So this is from the campaign trail, 2016, Trump, Hillary. They began their debate. This is Zaid Jilani in, I believe, The Intercept. Clinton and Trump began their debate. I remember this debate. I watched it by sparring over trade, and the two exchanging ideas how to prevent jobs from going overseas. And Clinton expressed, some not contrition, not remorse. She didn't blame herself or blame the policies that both parties, the bipartisan consensus in favor of the multinational elites and against American workers. She didn't, decry that, but she did say, yes, we do have to worry about losing jobs to China. But what Trump didn't point out, and I do remember him going after her for being a free trader quite a bit, what he didn't point out is that in 97, when she was first lady, so this is, we're talking a long history. She traveled to Davos. Of course, Davos, right? The most elite place you can go. The billionaire elites. She complained at the World Economic Forum that they didn't lobby hard enough. for fast track, because Clinton wanted to fast track most favored nation status and ultimately make it permanent normal trade relations. And she went to Davos and said, "What's the matter with you elites? Don't you get it? Lower wages in China than in the US. Much, 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 much lower wages in China. We can stop all these pesky labor organizers if we just simply go over to China. We can fire all these greedy, grabby workers. Why didn't you fight harder for this?" And the result was, I guess, very salutary for the First Lady. I think she had to be pretty pleased with what happened as a result, because in the end, that normal trade relationship with China was indeed normalized. And the effort that Clinton made it at Davos was successful. The American business community, now she complained, right? Because that American business community made such a limited effort, what did it do? It left the field clear to an unusual, and I'm sure for Clinton, very unfortunate alliance between the right of the Republican Party, which doesn't like, so the far right, which would be people, I guess, like Trump, at least when it comes to economics. And I don't even kid. Well, I think that's progressive. I think it's progressive to believe in protecting American jobs. But it's true, they were the right wing of the Republican Party to the extent that they didn't fall in line with the McConnells and the Bushes. So they were critical of free trade. And that ugly alliance, as Clinton would have seen it, joined with the left of the Democrats that believe that trade authority and trade agreements are not in the interest of American workers. So who was right? I mean, it's such a no-brainer. The Clintons got it complete. Well, they were right when it came to the business elites. It was in their interest, but it's certainly not in the interest of American workers to have permanent trade status with China. And that's why, again, I call them grand thieves. And in the end, that alliance carried the day, and permanent trade relations were established with China at the end of Clinton's presidency in 2000, which led to even ever worsening relative conditions for American workers. Really, that simple. So what was the upshot? Now, you may say, well, all right, who cares? So what? Those are workers, and they deserve it. Look, they aligned with the right. Hillary even told the elites that they were aligned with the right. I mean, who could blame them? I would say. And the far left of the Democratic Party, people like, I guess, the AOCs, back then, maybe was Howard Metzenbaum still a senator from Ohio, maybe. Dennis Kucinich, I believe, was in Congress at that point, maybe. So together they voted down the most permanent nation trading relation status, permanent favored nation status with China. Today's Democratic left can't even bestir itself to talk about trade. The AOCs, they just vote for Hakeem Jeffries, the congressman from Wall Street, and believe you me, they hate trade. They hate free. They love free trade. They hate trade protectionism for workers. They hate it. They can't even bestir themselves to vote against the free trader, the Congress member from Wall Street. So the workers have no allies. Bernie talked a lot about trade in 2016. He really didn't come up in 2020. He ran for president. To be fair, Biden did not reverse the Trump tariffs. I think if he had, he'd lose in 2024. He probably will win. So what was the political impact of the Clinton support of free trade? What did that do? What was the upshot? Well, because some of you might say, who cares? Who cares if those working people lost their jobs in Ohio and Indiana and which by the way voted for Obama in 2008 with the hope he would bring jobs back because both parties had been so bad. I mean, can you think about that? Indiana went Democratic in 2016 because of the vain hope that 2008, the vain hope, and Iowa did too, by the way, the vain hope they are now solid, dead red states. Why is that? Because Democrats don't support working people. It's just that simple. And they haven't. So if you're not going to support us, we'll go with the demagogues. We'll go with the right wingers. We'll go with the people who give us a victim, not a victim, who give us a scapegoat. And the scapegoat, foreigners. Scapegoat, people of color. Lots of scapegoats for the working class if the Democrats aren't going to blame those who are truly at fault and change the policies. Bring the jobs back. So China, what was the upshot? A lot of you want to say it was Russia. A lot of want to blame the deplorables. But studies, and I think this is dead spot on, say that it was the trade policies that the Clintons pursued, that the Democratic Party pursued, and endless war that cost Hillary the election, led to Trump's winning. So more on that. Let's see if we can get to. Yeah, so 15 years. The trading with China for 15 years may have cost Hillary the election. You can see from the numbers in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, the states that matter, Pennsylvania, that decide the election, people who were disaffected because they'd lost their jobs to offshoring, whose unions could not prevent pay cuts and benefits cuts because of the threat that a job would be relocated, would be offshored. Those people either didn't vote in 2016 or voted for Trump. There were a significant number of Obama to Trump voters. They were in the states that suffered the most job loss and the most income loss as a direct result of the rise of China. So it's really that policy that led to China's emergence, the free trade, and that led ultimately to Trump's emergence. Some of you may say, who cares? So what? And I would say, well, we might have war with China. We lost, millions of people lost jobs or lost good jobs and are taking, have to work 3 jobs and they're not well paying and they don't have benefits and we have to pay for their health care when they have a healthcare emergency and they most of the time don't even have health care at all. So maybe a lot of you are like, well, it doesn't matter because I'm doing fine. And well, when you talk about a war with China, maybe you're really just talking about a Cold War. And the Cold War with Russia really wasn't that bad now, was it? And in fact, Christoph addresses that. He says, maybe another Cold War wouldn't be that bad. We and the Russians, right? We had one man to avoid incinerating each other in the last one, but millions died in the last Cold War, proxy war zones from Vietnam to Angola. Yes. And we're going to see more and more. We're seeing, it's interesting, he doesn't mention the current proxy war in Ukraine. It's unfortunate, but I guess because he supports that. But obviously, the rise of China, a war with China, whether cold or hot, because China is so powerful, is going to be incredibly, and has already become incredibly devastating and destabilizing to the United States and to our working class. But even then, hey, maybe you own stock in Raytheon. Maybe it's not a big deal to you. And let me just get into this here because this was the other slide I wanted to show you why Trump won. And it is quite interesting here. So yeah, and it wasn't, by the way, just the trade, but that was a major factor. Also, communities that had lost the most people as casualties, American communities with the highest percentage of casualties in endless foreign wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Middle East, were the ones most likely to become Obama Trump voters. So many working class communities in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania had suffered disproportionate casualty numbers during the wars in the Middle East. Now, I know the total fatalities and casualties were relatively low compared to other wars, but there were still many people who were victims in our country, and also many who were just there tour of duty after tour of duty after endless tour of duty. Those people moved from Obama to Trump. That's why Trump won. And you can see from this study that the economists say that, hey, Chinese import penetration in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Michigan, all states that Trump won in 2016, led directly to his election and Clinton's loss. So maybe you care about that. I assume you would. But if even that doesn't faze you, well, I didn't do badly. The economy came up over Trump. And my stocks rebounded, right? They all came back. If none of that matters to you, well, does this? Because from what I gather, progressives, liberals really, really care about choice. And I do too. So your right to choose is under very, very severe attack. It's already been cut back because of the justices that Trump appointed, because of the justices that W appointed, and they are where they are, the power that they have, the influence that they have, as a direct result of the free trade policies that the Democratic Party has been complicit in promoting. That's why this is happening.
We're following some breaking news as we come on the air at 5. A U.S. appeals court makes a ruling about access to an abortion pill.
Jessica Quay joins us from the newsroom this morning with the breaking details. Jess, what's up?
Well, a U.S. appeals court ruled that the abortion pill mifepristone will remain available in the United States, but with significant restrictions. Those include a requirement for in-person physician visits to obtain the drug. It will only be dispensed up to 7 weeks instead of 10 weeks and not by mail. The Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans ruled just before midnight. By a 2-to-1 vote, a panel of 3 judges narrowed for now a decision by a lower court judge in Texas that had completely blocked the FDA's approval of the drug following a lawsuit by mifepristone's opponents. The drug was approved for use by the FDA more than 2 decades ago. Medication abortion makes up the majority of abortions obtained in the U.S. It has become a flashpoint in the abortion legal battle since the Supreme Court last year overturned Roe v. Wade. And now, under the appeal court's new order, the approval will stay in effect and the drug will remain on the market while an expedited appeal plays out. Reporting live in the newsroom, Jessica Quay, KDKA TV News.
All right. Thank you so much for that report from KDKA in Pittsburgh. So mifepristone lives to see another day. Of course, we have seen that the right to choose is already gone. It's been eliminated because of Trump and W justices. And why were they in the place that they were? Because of a backlash against both the Clintons, both Clintons and Obama, because of the free trade policies that they pursued, because of the rise of China and the concomitant decline of our working class. So if you don't care about any of that, I hope you care about your right to choose, which is now under very, very severe attack. It's no longer guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. In many states, it's gone. Even getting that abortion pill is now much, much more difficult because of a decision in Texas by a Trump judge. It was a Trump judge who said no more mifepristone. And people in Texas and other states that have revoked the right to choose, now they're even worse off because they can't get that drug by mail. They have to go to a doctor. I would assume there are going to be state laws that are going to, pull back on that right. This is going to be tied up in litigation. Girls are going to die because they are going to be forced to have to deliver babies that were the result of rape, result of forcible incest. This is just an absolute nightmare. And it's all because the Democratic Party has chosen to ally itself for 30 years to tie itself tightly to the multinational manufacturing, not manufacturing in terms of here, but those who own the concerns, who own the means of production, and have completely betrayed America's workers. That is why we're seeing this. I'll be back tomorrow. Have a great afternoon or morning if you're